think we'll make a start, and other people may still continue to join us. Yeah, there's a good amount here, so it's lovely to see you all. So I'll be as quick as possible so we can get to the bit that the people that you actually want to listen to, which are our lovely speakers this evening. But just to wish you all a warm welcome first to our webinar. So this is the webinar for Gaining Ground, Composting for Community Tree Nurseries. And this is brought to you by the Community Tree Nursery Collaborative webinar series hosted by us, Fellowship of the Trees. So thank you for being with us this evening. My name is Hayley and I am the CTNC coordinator for Fellowship of the Trees. So I'll just say a little bit about us in case you're joining us for the first time and you're not really sure what we're all about. So the Community Tree Nursery Collaborative is a peer-led network of community tree nurseries. It's facilitated by Fellowship of the Trees and also a core group of more experienced community tree nurseries who support other CTNs with their wisdom and experience. And we create an online platform basically for all CTNs or for people wanting to set up or join a CTN to learn all about tree growing, compare notes, learn from each other, and build each other up and build community basically. So we have funding to hold regular open space sessions once every other month, which is a space online. It's a Zoom meeting basically that we facilitate for all CTNs to come together, bring your questions, your frustrations, funding questions, anything you like, and it's peer-to-peer, helping each other work through those problems and learn from each other basically. And then we also run on the opposite alternative months, free webinars like the one this evening to learn about different elements of tree growing and running a community tree nurseries. So I think we're just going to put some links in the chat as well. So in terms of how you can get involved with the CTNC, we have a YouTube channel. So all of our webinars are recorded and posted on there, and there's we've done many over the last couple of years. So if you're looking for other topics, follow us on YouTube, have a look at our website. We also have a private Facebook page, and you can register to be part of the Community Tree Nursery Collaborative. And then gain knowledge from all of your fellow CTNs around the UK as well. And we're also on social media links. You can follow us on our Eventbrite page as well for instant updates on when we post new webinars, which will be coming to you every other month until at least March 2025 at the moment, and hopefully beyond if we get further funding. So just some quick boring housekeeping, and then I will introduce the speakers and we'll get going. So this, as I mentioned, our webinars are recorded. So just to let you know, this webinar is recorded and will be published on our YouTube channel. There's also a live stream on Facebook as well for this evening. So if you don't, you can turn off your camera if you don't want to be sort of recorded, but just to make you aware. So yeah, we will assume you're happy if you stay on for the webinar. Please also just keep your mics muted throughout. If you have questions throughout the presentations, just add these in the chat, and then we'll have quite a lengthy Q&A session at the end, and we'll answer as many questions as possible. If we don't get through all of them, we can develop answers to those and email them out afterwards as well. So yeah, just pop everything that you think of in the chat as we go through. So our speakers this evening, we're very excited to be hosting two very experienced and knowledgeable speakers. So Jake Corin from Symbiosis Soil Lab and Ben Bryant from Sustainable South Hams, who's a composting mentor. So they have very generously come to speak for us this evening on how their knowledge can help CTNs specifically to engage with soils and composting to increase tree health and resilience, community engagement, and understanding a resource that is arguably at the heart of regenerating land and ecosystems, and hopefully what we're all about in terms of tree growing as well. So through our work at the CTNC, we have identified a need for a webinar to cover both composting and healthy biosecure growing material. and also understanding the biology of soils within these processes for growing healthy, resilient, local provenance from seed. We hope that sharing this knowledge with you this evening for your community tree nurseries will potentially help you save money on costly compost purchases and being able to reuse your organic waste that's available to you on site. It should help you manage biosecurity risk through processes that Ben will go through. Prevent peat from being used in the tree growing system. There's a huge amount of trees being grown, and we know that obviously peat is not something that we should be taking out of the ground and using, so this is an alternative. And being able to grow resilient trees, already established connections with correct soil biomes and fungi for the soils that they will be planted in. It also potentially adds another layer of community engagement to your site and your organisation, and potentially access to more funding as well by adding the composting element to your site. So I will stop rabbiting on now and hand over to our speakers, which is what you're here for. So I will hand over to Jake first, who's going to talk to us about the biology of the soil and bringing that to life for us. And then Ben will follow in terms of composting elements and community engagement around that. So over to you, Jake. Thank you very much.
Nice. Thanks, Hayley. Thanks for that. So hi, everyone. My name's Jake. And yeah, as Hayley mentioned, I'm the co-founder of Symbiosis Soil Lab. We're a project that's been going for 2 years now, and we specialize on bringing soils back to life. We have a focus on the soil microbiology. And yeah, through that, we do testing, consultation, advice, training. We do an educational service where we have a mobile lab where we can bring the microscopes out on site and do a outdoor sort of learning experience. And then we also do the recipes of making microbial solutions, composts, and biological fertilizers. Yeah, a little bit of my background. I'm from St Ives in Cornwall, but now live in Totnes in Devon. And I originally studied horticulture and plant science at Duchy College down in Cornwall. And through that grew an interest into permaculture, and then more specifically using permaculture to regenerate ecosystems, and did this in a number of places internationally, from Middle East to Mediterranean, and of course in the UK. And then, yeah, I really got in the last few years a real focus on the soil microbiology. Had a real interest in soil, how it functions, how it's alive, and the fungi, the essential component of that. And then got really into the soil microbiology side of it. Okay. So yeah, I'm going to give an introduction to basically the potential of the soil microbiology, how this can help with composting, regenerating soil if you're transplanting, and also just health of the plants. We'll talk a bit about this. I haven't got any slides because I'm just going to present it. So if you do have a pen and paper to take notes, it could be quite useful because I'll put recommendations for research, and yeah, it would be good for you to take notes if you can. Okay. So when we think about, obviously, I know that we want to start thinking about the way that we can get growing mediums towards nurseries to help with trees. I think it's good to go back to the root of what we're trying to do with soils and how they function, just to understand that process. So then we can try and integrate as much of that into the way that we grow our plants for production. Okay. So when we think about a soil, okay, there's been such a focus in, well, the past century of the chemistry of the soil. Probably the most famous soil test you'll think of is pH test. Then obviously there's the chemistry, getting all the sand, silt, clay, all the minerals properly balanced. But for soil to function effectively and at its optimum, we need to have a synergy, like a combination of things that all function together in order to get that optimal functioning, like the way that nature does it. Okay, so the chemistry, this is an essential part, is very important. We need minerals, we need this for nutrition, for the health of our plants. Okay, then there's also the basically the organic material, the organic matter. Okay, this is the habitat for various organisms. It contains some nutrition, and it also creates the conditions for things, for the soil to be alive. Okay, and then the third component is the microbiology, the biology side of it. Okay, so you need to have the minerals, the biology, and the organic material functioning together in order to have the best growing material for your soil. Okay, so we can obviously replicate that in order to grow our plants, but we need to have these things in balance. Okay, so the way I like to think of it is like an analogy, basically, to simplify the understanding. Is imagine your microbiology. These are your workers. Okay, they'll do many tasks, many services, many functions for you. But like all living beings, and in this case, the workers, they need to have a home. They need somewhere to provide shelter, protect them from various conditions, whether it's outdoor, like they need protection from the rain, too much, if there's too much sun or wind, or various conditions. Okay, so that's where the organic material is the home. Okay, then they need food in order to power them, give them energy, and that's where the minerals come into it. Okay, if we can get the full nutrition to our plants, and there's some good research by a French scientist, where he came up with the term trophobiosis. Okay, and basically, if you can give a plant full mineral nutrition, it will not get sick. Okay, or a very minimal chance of it getting sick from pests and diseases. Okay, because pests and diseases will basically attack the plant when there's certain parts missing from the nutrition. Okay, so when we know this, we know, right, we need to get full nutrition to our plants. How are we going to do this? Okay, one option, we keep buying synthetic products, and we can put that on to give them some of the nutrition, but it's quite costly and difficult to cut, almost like an alchemist, trying to get all that recipe perfect every time, for every season, for every plant. Okay, so that's where the workers, the microbiology, can come into it. Okay, if we can get the microbiology and as much biodiversity, as much diversity of microbes in that growing medium, so our soil, or it can be our compost or our potting compost, we can then, these microbes can basically start taking apart the minerals from complex, complicated forms into more simple forms. Okay, because imagine you've got a rock. That rock has so many minerals, but if you're trying to grow a tree, the tree's not going to be able to get the minerals from that rock. Okay, so you've got to have that bridge to help get that mineral nutrition to that plant, because we want to break parts of it down as small as possible, so that our roots, our root hairs from the plant, can take up that nutrition, and we can get to that stage where, remember, trophobiosis, to get that full mineral nutrition. Okay, so if we get as many of these microbes in our growing medium, we can then basically have more potential, more microbes do more different functions, which will then help our plant get more nutrition. Okay, and so rather than us thinking, oh, what does that microbe do, what nutrition does it get, if we get a full range of diversity in there, then we can allow them to self-regulate, and then they can take on a lot of the responsibility that otherwise we'd be having to try and be, whether being trying to rebalance that chemistry ourselves. We can get the microbes to do that if we can get the conditions right for them. Okay, so then we think about, they need a home. That's the organic material. Okay, and think about organic material. If it's on the soil, on the land, this can be living, it can be a cover crop, like various combinations of plants. But if we're thinking in controlled growing conditions, specifically in nurseries, okay, it's compost. Okay, it's 100% organic matter. It's a great home for the microbes. It's a medium that is growing all these microbes. So if you get a healthy living compost, okay, this can really help get as much mineral nutrition to your plants, or prepare them when they do get planted. They've got access to those microbes to get that nutrition. Okay. So when we think about that, if we can get those things in balance, that helps us, and then we can then start to basically look after these microbes, and they will look after our plants. Okay. So when we think of the microbes, okay, there's probably some more famous ones that everyone knows about, okay, but there's actually a full community to get the best functioning, okay, and then there's the ratios in order to get the best functioning for what type of plant it suits, okay. So first, if we think, so firstly, to help you understand the ratios of the microbes to get the right compost, first I want you to imagine, or just remember even, when you see a field, okay, that's been completely tilled, okay, and it doesn't have any plants growing in it, okay, that's 0, okay, that's the starting point. But this can be also, just to give context, this could be like on a beach, or it could be a desert, okay? It's an ecosystem on the spectrum. If we're measuring 1 to 10, this is 0, okay? It have minimal bacteria, and it's at the start of evolution, okay? But if we allow that ecosystem in a process called ecological succession, okay, if we allow that ecology, that ecosystem to evolve, to mature, to complexify, okay, it will first start to, the bacteria will start to grow, they'll multiply, okay? Then they'll set the conditions that they can release an amount of nutrition in that soil or that growing medium that then allows for some basic plants to start growing in it, okay? So these are what we generally refer to as weeds, okay? Lower successional plants, okay? With these weeds, they basically grow very fast and they spread their seed like explosions everywhere to cover that area, okay? What they're doing is they're increasing the organic material, the organic matter. Remember, we need to provide a home for our microbes, and they're holding the moisture in the soil so the microbes can live for a longer amount of time, and they can evolve and build their communities to be more complex, okay? So that's what the weeds are doing, okay? And then when we've got more moisture and we've got more organic material that takes slower to break down, we then start to get some of our fungi start to appear in the soil, okay? So imagine you've got 75% bacteria, then you've got 25% of fungi starting to appear. The fungi can unlock more complicated nutrition, okay? So what this does, it releases more different types of minerals. If you've got more nutrition and more types of minerals from the fungi, you can then have plants that can then live a more longer time because they've got more power from the nutrition, okay? So you can get then to sort of herbaceous vegetables, 50-50. Then when we start going, like the natural tendency of that field or that desert is to naturally evolve into a forest, okay? The forest on that scale that I said about, that spectrum, is 10, okay? Nature wants to be an ancient forest until there's a disturbance that resets that system, okay? And so as the plants evolve from weeds to herbs to flowers, vegetables, to perennials, to shrubs, to trees, and then eventually a forest, this correlates with the soil, where it starts very basic bacteria, it starts to get a bit more complex bacteria, then we start to get some fungi, then the fungi start to equal the bacteria, then the fungi become dominant until it's a total fungal soil with minimal bacteria, okay? And that's what a tree in a forest wants, a fungal soil, okay? So when we know, like, why is this relevant? It's basically when we know and can understand what our plant needs in the soil, what type of nutrition it needs available, and we can then help it get to full health. And when we know the type of microbes that can support the nutrients that the plant needs, we can then get this recipe right in our compost, so we can then use it for our nursery production any type of growing, whether you want to be replanting, rewilding, agriculture, agroforestry, permaculture, you can then understand these ratios of microbes, and you can put in the foods that will support them in your compost to help get to that level. Okay, so that's the foundation. But then that's bacteria and fungi. But then you've also got these living populations that they need to have a bit of management. They need to have something that controls the populations. Otherwise, the bacteria could explode at a certain point of having so many of them, or it could happen in another way. And these are where we have our predators, okay? So say, for example, our predators can be nematodes, protozoas, like amoebas or flagellates, okay? These are our beneficial microbes. When we have the foundation of bacteria to fungi balanced with our predators, okay, we have these functional groups of species that together form the soil food web, okay? And what this is then the soil microbiome that can then support the optimum nutrition that the plant needs. Or it's so far from research one of the best frameworks that shows how we can get a living soil to produce nutrition. Okay, so then we can then start to think about how we can get these populations of microbes into our growing medium. So making a compost. If we want to feed the bacteria, we use more green material, more waste, or even like food waste. These are more fast, simple to break down, and contain more nitrogen, okay? Whereas if you want to feed the fungi, we start putting more carbon, like wood chips. Wood chips are the holy grail of fungal composting. And we can start putting in more complex foods, more harder carbon-rich foods that will support the fungal populations, okay? So if we start getting higher ratios of fungal carbon material, we can sustain our fungal populations, and we can reduce our bacteria populations by putting less green in there, okay? So when we can understand what are we putting into our compost, what is it feeding, and who's going to grow and what populations will come, we can get a little bit more control of what diversity of biology we're putting into our growing, our crops and our plants and our growing mediums, okay? So that's a little brief intro of why various microbes are important to soil, to compost, to growing mediums, okay? And then when we think about just some options that we could use if you were doing a nursery, obviously you can have a living compost that you can use as an inoculation to help support other plants. You can make a more complicated method is you can make it into a tea, okay, where you can, in a suitable container, pump oxygen to get the beneficial microbes growing. The reason why you would put that oxygen in is because if you have enough oxygen, okay, this helps the beneficials grow. If you reduce your oxygen, that's when you get diseases, okay? So you want to have a nice aerobic compost or aerobic soil to support the types of plants you're growing, okay? And so there's different things we can do to basically host these microbes to transfer to our plants, okay? And so just to sort of let you know, just some practical ideas that you could use to stimulate some of the microbes, I'll suggest, and then I'll pass over to Ben and Hayley, okay? If you want to boost your fungal populations, obviously a more predominantly carbon, more woody type compost is really good, okay? The longer you leave it, ideally over 9 months, your biodiversity will increase significantly, okay? We can also then use biochar, okay? Biologically activated charcoal, okay? And this can either be made yourself or you can buy it from various places now, okay? This charcoal is inoculated with microbes, okay? And I've done some personal testing on this in a nursery setting, okay? And basically, you can use the biochar to stimulate the mycorrhiza symbiosis in the soil, okay? And this will then help boost the plant growth and give that immunity and the protection they need. And it's even possible, what I found as well, that if you have plants next to each other, occasionally you can get the plants will actually, the roots will search for that biochar and use it as a battery to power, like say on the modular trays I used. The roots will search for that, use it as a battery to charge while they're waiting for the plant to increase the photosynthesis. Okay, so this really helps plants in tough conditions and can help give them a boost at certain times. Okay, because the more photosynthesis you have, the more sugar that feeds the roots, which feeds the microbes. Okay, and another really good one, if you want to get your predator organisms in there, composting is amazing to get those predators in there. And then if you really want to like increase the numbers of these nematodes, flagellates, amoebas, various protozoa type organisms, worm farm, vermicomposting is a really great method. Okay, and there's some great videos by Jeff Lawton on, you can find them on YouTube or even on his website, where he does some amazing low-tech vermicomposting methods using like recycled bathtubs or even containers. And these are really good techniques. They really get a lot of good biology, and it's a great way to recycle the food if you're doing it at home or on site at the nursery. It's a really good method to use. Okay, but I would say really good compost, biochar, and vermicomposting are some really great methods to boost biology, especially if you're using for nursery growing, for specifically for trees, because as well the vermicomposting is a great biological alternative to peat, which is really good and is charged with microbiology. It just doesn't have so much fungi, and that's where you can think about the biochar to be the fungi inoculant for that. Okay, yeah, so I think I'll pass over to Hayley and Ben now. That was a little brief and it was a bit freestyle, but yeah, I hope people got what they want, a bit of something from that. Okay, thanks guys.
Thank you, Jake.
That's okay.
Yeah, I've already scribbled down loads of questions. I don't know about everyone else. So yeah, we'll definitely come back to you in the Q&A. Yeah, we'll hand over to Ben now to talk us through the community element of composting and more of the technicalities of composting as a CTN. Thank you, Ben.
Wow, thank you, Jake. That was amazing. I'm going to be watching that over and over again. That was really interesting, and I know you can have a lot of questions. Thank you, Hayley. Thank you for inviting me. I'm thrilled to be here to talk about community composting, which is my thing. It's my passion and my enthusiasm. So I'm bringing the context of how to set up a community composting project and all the elements that go with that. And really how that's applicable to community tree nurseries and how that relates is something we can really bring to the discussion at the end. So yeah, I'm Ben and I live in South Devon. I'm coming at you zooming from Malden, which is in between Torbay and Totnes. And essentially, I am involved as a compost mentor, helping a project which is funded by the local council down here called the South Hams District Council. And I'm supporting community composting and also home composting. So this is high on the agenda for the local council. They've put a fair bit of money towards supporting Sustainable South Hams, which is a community interest company, and doing this in partnership with Devon Community Composting Network. So it's got quite a history, quite a legacy, the Community Composting Network, and the work here in Devon is going on all around the country right now. Like there's a real boom in composting. It's a hot topic. And there's so many ways to go about community composting. A lot of what I've learned has come from a guy called Nicky Scott, who's a bit of a godfather of composting down here in Devon, at least, and well known nationally. And he's taught me an awful lot over the last 15 years. And I'm director of the Devon Community Composting Network. So we're here to provide information to groups all over. but there's a growing movement. So it's really exciting to see so much composting happening at different scales. My background is an earth scientist. I did degrees in geology, then mineral exploration. I wasn't too keen on the mining industry, so I about turn and went into, I did a master's in environmental and earth resource management. So there's a kind of a thread running through my career with earth resources and managing them, earth stewardship. And I'm now a self-employed gardener, so I'm super keen on compost and making sure my customers have good composting systems, and deal with it as close to source as possible, because the proximity principle is really key to this. It's dealing with your resource as close to source and not transporting it around. The kind of reduce, reuse, recycle mantra was a big part of my life as I was a recycling officer for a local district council. And that's when I came across Nikki Scott and composting, because we were giving out all these Dalek bins, the plastic Daleks, cool composting, which worked pretty well. But I found that there was very little information going out with those Daleks. And people were sometimes like not sure how to use them and ended up with a sort of anaerobic sludgy mess because they were putting in too much food waste and wet material and perhaps not getting the mix right. So from then on, I started to experiment, became more of a gardener, became keen on composting. So much to cover. It's a massive subject. Unlike Jake, I've got loads of slides, probably too many. So I'll try and whiz through as best I can because it's such a broad subject. I need to share my screen in order to start my presentation. So hopefully, share. Yay. Yeah, you can see that. Fantastic. Okie dokie. So yeah, community composting. I'm going to say a bit about what I know and what I'm trying to bring about here in South Devon as part of this growing movement. I think every town and village needs a community composting project. Yeah, and there's so many reasons why. So, hoping the presentation will roll. Okay. So, soil is the source of life. Okie doke. I'm just hoping this will flow. So I like to think of this as a nice analogy, a compost heap being a living organism, and much like Gaia. So just to say a bit about what we're doing down in the South Hams, quickly, what I'm involved in is a series of pilot projects. So we've offered sort of range of home and community composting offerings to the local council to see what they think is relevant and pertinent to getting people to compost more. So there's a few snapshots of things that we're doing, from worm farms, like DIY solutions for worm farms and bokashi, to composting training courses, to converting wheelie bins into something useful. There's a load of redundant wheelie bins in this particular district because the council decided to, well, they charge for their garden clippings for the collection. And a lot of people didn't sign up for that because it was free. It was largely free across Devon, but all the districts have changed that policy to charge. And we thought, well, how can we do something good with these wheelie bins, of which there are tens of thousands? So converting wheelie bins, also doing food waste composting clubs at neighbourhood and street level, and also road shows and outreach to raise awareness about composting, essentially. So this is the South Hams area. There's all these districts here. So we're trying to get them involved. A lot of them have called climate emergencies as parish councils. So we're trying to, really get a network going and get a movement and increase the number of sites and let these villages and parishes know that it's really possible that they can do this and have a composting project locally. This is where we're at the minute. There's about 8 projects around South Devon. I'm involved in one near Paynton on the east side of the district, on the right-hand side. So Malden is the village I live in, and we've got a project up and running. So it's been really interesting to go through that process with my own local community and really feel a part of my community now, which is a wonderful thing. This was Devon back in 2005. All these little heaps, you can see are spots of community composting projects in Devon 20 odd years ago. And there was quite a movement, but it was really heavily supported by the local council. And then funding reduced for what's called recycling credits that they were offering, which helped a bit financially. And the scene shifted when councils then started to collect garden clippings. So made it easier for people to deal with it from their house, etc. But yeah, there's a lot going on. So some of those have been and gone, but we're looking to grow that network with the Devon community composting. And a lot of the stuff still stands now, a lot of the principles of how to do it, but it's moved on and it's so much more topical. There's all the information about the soil microbiome, and the need is really great to rebuild soils and regenerate soils because of the issue of soil degradation has been so in our face and quite scary, really. So yeah, we've done some training courses, masterclass training, which is, you know, proving very popular. People want to know about this stuff. People are really interested in composting, that's for sure. A little taster on the wheelie bin thing. We're just converting wheelie bins, the one on the left into a worm farm, the one on the right is into water butts. Really good water saving, easy thing to do. So there's ways to do that, and we're trying to get people to save money by converting stuff into, you know, DIY usable equipment. The other one is we've converted into a hot bin for grass clippings, actually, which is quite effective. So experimenting and just having a conversation about how you can compost at home. The local community hubs, we're trying to get them to have examples of these converted wheelie bins. There's South Brent, they've got a worm farm outside their community centre. And we're also doing a home composting demo site in the area. So South Brent's a popular large community composting site, been going for 15 years. They've got a number of bays. They're very popular. They're getting over 100 visits on a Sunday morning when they're open. They're open for a few hours. They're run by volunteers. They've got a pool of about 50 volunteers that run the project, and they help out, you know, doing a Sunday morning once in a while. All of them. There's a big pool of people. But we're bringing a home composting demo site as part of this funded project, so people can come and see live demonstrations of different home composting methods and find out more about how to do it themselves. So all these composting projects, so it's things like a Dalek, a tumbling bin, a Bokashi system, a hot bin, worm farm, etc., etc. Maybe you could include like a hot composting pallet bin setup. All the numerous types of home composting tools that people could adopt. So that's a sort of a drawing of how this is going to look when it's come up, and that's on the South Brent site, so people can come and learn. It's about engagement and education as much as anything, but showing people like how to troubleshoot these composting systems, because they're all working live and direct, so we'll see them all working and there's information available. So another thing we're doing is food waste compost clubs, which are going on around the country at a neighbourhood and street level, for people to deal with food waste locally as close to source as possible, but collectively in a tumbling bin, in an in-vessel composter, then going through the hot phase of composting, and then using a hot box or a hot bin for the maturation phase, for the vermicomposting, to like mature the compost. So really amazing organization or movement, Old Tree Soil. They run the mycelium network, and there's an example of many of these compost clubs that are popping up around the land. There's many more than that, but there's an example. There may be one near to you. This kind of scheme can be used for school composting as well. There's been a lot of that in Devon. There was funding years ago, but they need to be maintained. There needs to be continuity to make that work, and schools could be notoriously tricky for teachers coming and going and lack of time and resources, but it's very doable. So Compost Hub, just in the words of Old Tree Soil, advocating the widespread creation of community compost hubs. And the solution is in the soil. We want to see living soil at the heart of local communities everywhere. So we're working to get a composting hub in every community. So it's very much aligned with what we're hoping to do down here in the South Hams, in South Devon. But this is going on big time in places like Bristol, Lewis, Frome, Brighton, etc. So yeah, and then harking to the microbiology, being the vehicle, the engine room to make Earth living. So what is community composting? Cups of tea and cake, sitting around and being social, but there's also lots of work involved. So it's Essentially, community groups and social enterprises involved in producing compost, using it for the benefit of local communities, sustainable local management of biodegradable material, and community composting can range in scale. So this is a really important point. It can be different sizes, different scales. There's no like one size fits all. There's different ways to do it according to the land you've got, the site, the space, the community, the number of people involved, the accessibility. There's so many parameters and variables. So it's really interesting to see what's going on. So I'll paint a picture of a few of the different types, hopefully, as I go through this. But it's about getting people together to work collectively to turn what is by the majority seen as a waste into a resource. So yeah, why? Many reasons. Stop pollution, stop bonfires and fly tipping, provides volunteering opportunities, jobs, local resources and products. The issue of peat and saving peat bogs, empowering the community, and it's fun and fascinating. People want compost as well because of the no-dig revolution, looking to disturb the soil less and add organic material onto their garden. So objectives is to operate a bring site for local residents for composting of organic garden material, supporting this proximity principle, one of the essential key principles of sustainable waste management. Deal with your waste as close to source as possible, and raising awareness. There's so many benefits, but I think a big one is keeping fertility in local soil rather than being removed, taken away to some industrial composting site. And generally nothing comes back to the local soil in that model. It's great that the councils collect organic material and people's garden clippings, but it's even better if people can do that in their own garden or use a community facility locally if they can't, for whatever reason, use their garden space. So soil degradation, creating good quality compost and growing mediums, providing information and education on saving earth resources, and this alternative to bonfires. So I think there's been a culture in this land of just burning brushwood, woody stuff. But there's other ways to deal with woody material, and biochar is in the mix now, which really raises value to compost. Knowing the potential of biochar is incredible. So this picture speaks to an abundance of a community composting site. It's about creating compost for what? For what purpose? So I think for growing and local food projects is really significant. So for more local food growing, but it's also very applicable to the projects you're doing with tree nurseries and growing mediums and community tree orchards and all sorts of horticultural projects locally. There's so many benefits, social and community. I'm not going to go through them all, but there are myriad benefits. There's loads going on as far as like getting social cohesion, community cohesion and joint working. Environmental benefits, again, reducing the need for artificial fertilizers, increasing organic matter, locking CO2 in the soils, improving green spaces, and moisture retention is a massive thing. So retaining and replenishing valuable nutrients in the soil, but also water, because it's a soil sponge. And we need to hold water. We're seeing so much rivers are brown and everything's getting washed, soil's getting washed into the rivers and to the sea. But also in the urban environment, there's so much water runoff out of people's gardens. And in times of drought and scarcity of water, this is the best way to hold it, is in the soil where it belongs. Economic benefits, there are many. So to start a project, I've got so much to cover, folks. I'm sorry, I'm probably going to run over, so I'll keep my eye on the clock. Starting a project, firstly, you need a bona fide group. You need a committed group of people, or at least a nucleus to start you off. I guess a lot of you are already connected to community organizations, so you've got that head start. Here in Malden, we began from scratch. We sort of called it out in the community and started with an unincorporated association, just the most basic community group model, and went from there. And it takes time to build, but it's a gradual process, bit by bit. So an action plan, clarify what actions are needed to be carried out to move the project forward, to start the project. Key considerations are a site. So the key thing we find is getting a site and negotiating a site that's fit for purpose. And then resourcing people, the volunteer recruitment side of things. Getting resources financially, funding, because composting is a lot of work and not much in the way of financial income, or at least a lot of composting groups down here don't seem to charge enough. I think compost has not really had enough value attributed to it. That's changing though, particularly bringing in biochar, but how groups can diversify and be really triple bottom line, so have an economic edge to what they're doing, generating income from organic resources. So this is a really important point. So these projects can be sustainable and they can continue. Trying to just like think about resources, signposting, and going to other local projects and linking up with what's already being done and looking locally, but also around the country. Compliance is a consideration, although I won't go into that too much, but there will be questions, I'm sure. But I think it's about environmental permit and whether or not you need a permit. So if you're composting less than 60 tons, if you've got less than 60 tons of finished compost, you just need an exemption, which is called a T23 from the Environment Agency. If you're collecting material and transferring it around, you might need a waste transfer license if it's going on and off the site. But essentially, the permit or the exemption to the permit is free, lasts for 3 years. And if you're composting over 60 tons, you may well have to get a permit, which is going to cost some money. However, trying to help navigate these barriers to entry is the key thing. So also the site planning, logistics, equipment, that's the other kind of key considerations. So you'll see a little image there of the guide we've created in the South Hams for community composting. So really happy to share that because it covers all these main considerations. And it's a kind of a quick start guide to overcoming the main considerations or really thinking and planning about a project as a community. So that'll be shared by Hayley at the end in the resources. Finding a site. That's the one in the village Malden. We were lucky to get a site from National Trust, but many of the sites in the area have been supported by local key organisations that have unlocked the site, such as Southwest Water. There's a site locally. They've offered a site. They've got land. Dartmoor National Park have offered a site. One of the key projects, South Brent, has been supported by Dartmoor National Park. How do you find a site? So it's also be creative. I think it's really important. I think, for example, local farmers have a part to play here. If they have a spare bit of land with impoverished soil that's low quality, that maybe you could do a deal to rebuild the soil on that land and maybe give the field back over a number of years. Sites aren't often permanent. You know, you've got to be light on your feet and creative. You can't always be guaranteed the site's going to be there, so it's about constantly looking. But a lot of the sites, you know, if you get an established site over time, it's a massive benefit. So that's a map of a typical community composting project with materials kind of going in and out. So the bottom left-hand corner, the stacking up the material, the arisings that would be delivered onto site generally. And then you have the compost bays, normally a dry store. And then top right-hand corner, there's finished composting bags ready to give back to the community. So it's really important that it's a circular thing. It's providing good quality compost for local people. And in the middle, that's a trommel or a Devon sieve, which is obviously sieving a fine, good quality compost. Again, that's a slightly more elaborate version. It's mechanized. So many community composting projects would have mechanized support, say a little tractor coming in to turn the heap. For example, the South Hams Council offer that resource, and also a shredder, a mobile shredder. So we're well supported down here by this particular council. But again, you can work on different levels of equipment and resource. So yes, compliance and red tape. Well, we're pretty good at that in this country, I guess. However, it's needed, isn't it? It's an Environmental Protection Act. It's a duty of care. So we need to be aware that these projects are following that duty of care. But yeah, as long as you're evidencing that, you've got your health and safety policies, the right procedures in relation to compliance and insurance. Looking after volunteers is a key thing, really, making sure that they're well looked after and protected. Group building. So there's the group in Malden. As we started, we were having fun setting up and building and getting together. And we've really enjoyed the process. It's been fun. And that's the key thing, you know, trying to make it enjoyable. We've done a lot of community engagement. That's Malden Apple Pie Fair. We did stuff for kids, all ages. We had a plant sale. We've done seed swaps. And it's become really, engaging. It's like trying to do as many events as we can. And we found that the feedback, the energy for composting is incredible. Clear communications is really important. So on site, like telling people what to compost rather than what not to, it's giving positive, affirmative information and saying, here, put this stuff, here, put that stuff, rather than don't put that here or no to that. I think it's trying to have a positive message. But then flip side, bottom right, we've got, please don't bring us. So there's certain things, communication that you don't want brought onto site. So it's really important to be informative and communicative. So all the different parameters, like who would be involved. So there's environmental groups, allotments could be doing this, village groups, gardening groups. I mean, it's good to have crossover of community groups, community gardens, link up with community gardens, food growing projects, etc. Yeah, so to link it to community growing, I think it's really important. And linking with local composting projects. Here's some pictures of local projects in South Devon and South Hams. There's one in a place called Ashbrington, which is like not even manned. So people come through and just follow. They take their garden clippings, they go around the circle of the site, and then they collect their compost. They leave their name in the book if they've taken compost. But it works really well in that community. So yeah, Ashbrington, there's Kingsbridge that serves the local rec. South Brent, which is a really big popular site now. That's a very old picture, but they've got lots of compost bays and that's really developed. And we're getting funding to do this home composting demo site. Stoke Fleming near Dartmouth, really good groups going since 2005, composting serving the community. Malden, who I'm involved with, we started off collecting Christmas trees and it was really popular at Christmas, just gone. And we collected about 80, 90 trees and we chipped them up for ericaceous mulch and gave them back to the community. That was just a gesture to get us going. We started at spring equinox and like yesterday we had about 20 visitors and we're just building slowly. We don't have a mechanized site. You can't really get a vehicle on there, but we're doing it light touch, we're turning it ourselves. We do use a shredder. We bring a small shredder in, but it just goes to show it can operate at different scales. There's Malden and that was what we gained yesterday. A fresh heap and some more under the tarpaulin there. So this is an allotment, Chudley Rotters, which is a project going for a long time. And this is really applicable for allotments. And moving on to equipment, what equipment do you need? Well, it depends on your budget and how much sort of people power you have really, but shredders can be very, very useful to speed the process up. Having a sieve for turning the compost and sieving it into a finer product so it's less coarse, it's far more appealing and a better compost to give out and sell. Many of the projects in Devon have been selling bags of compost for £1 or £2, but I think that's really underselling this precious resource, this black gold. So we're trying to encourage them to get a bit more value out of the end project because there's a lot of manual work involved. There's a Devon sieve and the guy that invented it, I think it's from Chagford. Can't remember his name, but Nikki knows him well. And other equipment you may need. So if you're doing collections, you may need delivery vehicles, which you could use all manner of things from small to flatbeds and trailers. You'll need waste transfer licenses for that, incidentally. But there have been projects in Devon, say in East Devon, there was Otter Rotters back along that were collecting from their whole district of East Devon. And they were doing that before the council was collecting garden waste, and they were a social enterprise. They employed a lot of people, did a lot of social benefit. So tractors, front loaders, bobcats, JCBs, telehandlers, operational equipment, chainsaws, shredders, optional. But really you need scales, sieve, wood to make your bays, pitchforks, hand tools, thermometer, those things from the top down. Depends on the scale of your site, and as tree nurseries, you're probably going to have mechanized equipment where you're bound to have. So it's different for every project what you might need. Get creative, I think that's the point. That was taken some time ago, that picture. But it's about getting creative and looking at different ways to make most of your resources and kind of stack up the functions of your site. So what can you produce in terms of earth resources from your community tree nursery with the equipment you've already got? Biochar is a big deal. So this is an example of a local hedge layer who's using all the brash from the hedge laying using an Oregon style kiln to make biochar, getting through a lot of brash woody material and having a brilliant end product at the end. And then why compost? I've got to be mindful of time here, folks. How am I getting on? Okay, so the importance of organic matter, I won't dwell on that because Jake's talked a lot about that. Compost being important because it buffers pH, and it helps reduce the need for pesticides and chemicals, obviously. And the soil microbes feed plants and protect them from pests and diseases. Compost feeds your soil, which in turn feeds your plants. The no dig thing, less need to dig and less disturbance of the soil. You need plenty of compost for that method. And carbon sequestration. So talking about glomalin, which is a glycoprotein produced by fungal hyphae. It glues together soil particles and contributes to soil carbon and nitrogen storage, and how plants take atmospheric CO2 for photosynthesis, and their roots put it back into the soil. Less waste. The biodiversity, like the compost heaps, are all the kingdoms of life. So it's like a cornucopia of life. Money saving and resources. Compost and its benefits, like talking about suppressing plant diseases, suppression of weeds, increasing plant health, and not needing artificial inputs. And also at the top there, the water retention. A little bit about hot composting, which is relevant. So I think this relates to biosecurity on your sites and pests and diseases. So bacteria being the engine room, and there's different types of bacteria that work at different temperatures. I think that's the point. And aerobic and anaerobic. So bokashi is a very popular method which uses anaerobic bacteria, but generally we're talking in community composting about aerobic and the need for oxygen in the heaps. So it's all about air and water and getting the balance between air and water and structure. So there's enough moisture, but also enough air circulating in the compost heap. So bacteria are responsible for a lot of the initial phase of composting, and also 80 to 90% of composting process initially carried out by bacteria, which heats up the process and they reproduce and create the heat. And then fungus-like organisms called actinomycetes, which break down the tough woody material in the maturation phase. And this is where the fungal content increases. And thinking biosecurity, using hot composting processes, which goes through 3 distinct thermal phases: an initiation phase, initial activation phase, the thermophilic phase, the hot phase, and the maturation phase. And this little diagram kind of describes the 3 phases and how the temperature rises with bacterial activity in the thermophilic phase, and it kills weed seeds and pests, and the sanitation aspect kicks in when it gets above a certain temperature, over 40 in the thermophilic phase. And it can get so hot that it kills off all bacteria, so they kind of kill themselves in the end. And then it cools down, and you can repeat the thermophilic phase when it cools down by turning the heap, adding oxygen again, and that can happen numerous times, 3 or 4 times. And then the maturation phase, when it cools down, mesophilic bacteria again, fungal content, and the worms. So the vermiculture kicks in the maturation phase. That's a very quick description of hot composting. So yeah, 3 stages: the mesophilic stage beginning with larger creatures, worms, millipedes, invertebrates, and the initial rapid growth of bacteria. Mesophilic bacteria, medium heat-loving microorganisms. And then rapid consumption of amino acids and huge growth in microorganism populations. And then thermophilic microorganisms from all 3 groups: bacteria, fungi, actinomycetes. And the majority of composting occurs during this phase, where the plant wall materials such as cellulose and hemicellulose are broken down. And once the temperature approaches about 70 degrees C, the compost is sanitized as the pathogens are killed. And the intense heat kills any seeds from unwanted weed plants or weed seeds, which is a big thing. And then lastly, the maturation phase. Oh, where's that gone? Get back to sharing my screen there. A little bit of a jump. Bear with me. I've pretty much got through that anyway, so I think we're there. Let's call it a day there. I think I've spoken enough. There's so much to cover, but I'll stop screen sharing and get back to discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Wow, that I know you said there is a lot to get through, but that really is a whistle-stop tour of, yeah, there really is a lot to be
Yeah,
thinking
scratch the
about with
surface there, Hayley,
composting.
really.
Yeah, and there aren't any questions in the chat, but please do, if you have any questions initially to ask the speakers, please put them in the chat and we will work through them. In the absence of any at the moment, I guess drawing it back to the relevance for community tree nurseries, it'd be really great to kind of just talk through more of a scenario, I guess, thinking about community tree nurseries that are already set up either with a site or looking to get a site. If they were just composting waste materials, their own waste materials, if you like, they weren't getting donations from wider community, sort of grass clippings and green waste. What is the best methods that you would recommend for that scale for their tree nursery, for creating growing medium, I guess, or mulching for the trees that they're growing? And on the flip side, if they are thinking about making, okay, I'm going to stop there. Let's talk about that one first, and then we can talk about stacking on site with multiple different functions and how that might be good for CTNs in terms of, yeah, a sort of diversity of activities going on. It would be really good to hear from both of you, I think. Jake, in regards to, I think, like just a quick summary of the main things for CTNs. So you talked about worm farming and biochar and different ways to increase organisms that would kill pests and that kind of thing. Just like a quick summary of what we need to be thinking about as a CTN when we're composting. Do we need to be putting more carbon elements in? And anything we can be doing within the maturation phase in terms of, I don't know, adding leaves or soil from where the sites where we've collected that local provenance seed, so that it kind of works with the mycology element, I guess I'm thinking about, as well as the general soil biome. And then from you, Ben, just thinking about the types of that scale of composting, very small scale, what kind of bins, how many bins, and yeah, thinking about those processes for green waste and maybe a little bit of food waste from volunteers on site, and how you'd get the best growing medium out of that. And then we can look into bigger scale projects, I guess, as a second. Okay, I'll stop talking. Who wants to go first?
I was just going to say, I mean, it's such a match made in heaven, isn't it, really? Community tree nurseries and community composting. It's an incredible prospect because of the fact that there's so much feedstock. I don't know much about community tree nurseries. I've not been involved in one as much as I'd like to. But it just strikes me as an obvious match. So there's all that feedstock, there's all that organic matter, a diversity of organic matter, and there's the need for compost for growing mediums. So the fact is that, well, I would imagine you've mostly got your own sites, and that's one of the biggest hurdles to overcome. And you've got a team of people, so processes in place, potential to recruit volunteers. It's a highly interesting area, and a lot of people, I mean, what a match, composting and planting trees. It's great. And then the potential for all that biochar. So I'll leave it at that, just to say how exciting it seems to be, and we'll go into more detail.
Yeah, I just apologies if I misheard the question a little bit, but I'll try and I'll just try and give an answer to some of the thing. I suppose with nurseries as well, with all composting, it's trying to be more efficient with your organic waste recycling, and so setting up systems is really important. And say for in nurseries, there's always going to be an excess of even potting compost to then organic material. Quite often there's the outdoor, there's just the maintenance of the outdoor area around the nursery. There's so much organic material that can be used, and obviously it doesn't need to be done on the scale of agriculture of making big windrows, but if you can getting as much biological diversity starting with the organic material into a sort of almost like a mother pile, where you've got this medium to grow with diverse organic material that then has a home or a host for high biological diversity of microbes. This is then going to really increase the health of the plants, even if you can just put a small amount of it into the mix of maybe the general potting compost or a way to sort of use that as an inoculation. You can get some really nice benefits from that. If there's ways as well that, well, not saying that I know how to do the system, but just suggesting ideas and stuff, but there's great opportunities with the irrigation through like fertigation. Like imagine spraying the microbes on the plants to increase the health, like a probiotic, and then using various methods to put what you feel is the right microbial solution into that could be interesting. But the main thing's thinking about really efficient recycling systems, because the reason why so many growing projects or agricultural systems are not working at their full potential is because there's excess waste that's not being cycled. If we can close as many loops in the cycling process, and that's with especially with our organic waste management, we can really increase the fertility and get really good nutrition to the crops, which is only going to improve their growth, increase their quality, and increase their value, and give them a higher chance when they get put in, for having those qualities to transfer into nature.
Okay. And Jake, you mentioned there's a bit that you said and I didn't quite catch it around one of the elements of composting you said was a really good alternative to peat. But I didn't quite catch that, and I wonder whether other people did as well. Could you just sort of re-elaborate on that for us?
Yeah, so I was saying about vermicomposting, and if there's a specific recipe, well, method that I can just briefly describe and then give a link to it that I really recommend.
Great.
And basically, if you can put, well, find a suitable container. It could be a 1,000-litre container, or you could use a bathtub, okay? But I'll talk with the bathtub because I think it's a really good method, and there's multiple functions from that, including the recycling. But if you get a bathtub and you put it at an angle, so you've got your plug here at the lower end, and the bathtub is at an angle. You can put it on 2 breeze blocks with 3 breeze blocks at the upper side. Fill that with 60% manure. Okay, cow's the best. No, the best is as many as possible, or cow, and then go through what you feel healthy choice. Ideally, as organic as possible, and the microbes will fix it eventually as well. Then basically flush that out. Fill the bathtub with water, so all the nitrites flush out and out of that. Okay. Then put a layer of 20% wood chips, as diverse as possible. Okay, and then put a top 20% layer of green material. Okay, then get a handful of worms. They can be from wherever you can find them. It could be a local compost, could just be under a pile of leaves on the drive. You can find them. For some reason, they love it on leaves on the drive, I found, but also under bits of cardboard on compost pile, various places. A handful of worms, put them in after you've flushed it, and then leave them for 2 to 3 months, okay? And then you can put your waste material. It could be just bits of some of the leaves that have dropped from some of the plants or the trees, or you could just put some excess, create your home like food waste system. Just don't put citrus or allium plants because they're too strong, okay? And you'll then get, after 90 days, 3 months, you'll get, call it worm castings, okay? It's a worm compost. Okay. Then what you do is you flood the bathtub because it's at an angle, and as it gets to that, as the water rises, the worms don't like the water. They'll go to the top. So at that bit that's raised, you create an island, and all your worms will go there. So you can take them out to use for another worm farm, into your soil, to inoculate a compost. But then you're left then with this worm like compost basically that doesn't have the worms in. And this is really, it has really high amounts of biological diversity, those predators that I mentioned, and is a really great to add to a compost that has already been used, or to use as a replacement for peat as well. And the recipe that I learned is from Jeff Lawton. It's on YouTube. He goes through and talks. He's got a really good infographic on it as well. But I've had really good results with that. Yeah, because then if you get that quality of biology into your potting plants, you can then reduce your irrigation. Like what Ben was saying, the compost's got many qualities, obviously from the health, and all of that side, but it does really can help reduce the irrigation requirements of plants as well, because it makes them stronger. Okay.
That's really great advice. Thank you. And that feels very doable on a CTN site as well, if it's just a bathtub or a couple of bathtubs to be swapping over, and for that to be a peat substitute that just creates that really rich kind of like humusy soil that can then be mixed in with other compost.
Yeah.
And for
just
the
a
soil
quick thing as
retention.
well.
Yeah.
When you've made that as well, when you flush it, but then you can actually, with that water that you flooded the worms, you can dilute it 1 to 4, and you can use it as a very simple biological fertilizer that will have different microbes and nutrition in there that can be useful as well for it.
Great. Thank you, Jake. Yeah, and it'd be great to circulate. I will be circulating an email out to all everyone that's registered for this webinar with really helpful links that Jake and Ben have kindly put together for us as well, including that handbook from Ben, which pretty much covers it is the composting Bible. I'm just conscious that there are some questions now in the chat, so we'll just go through those first to prioritize those. So Anne is asking, how much raw material is required to make the equivalent of a 70-litre bag of compost? Is it 3 times the end product or a bit more? Is that an easy answerable question, Ben?
It's not that easily answerable. I guess there's, I mean, obviously at the beginning, green waste is predominantly moisture, or the clippings are predominantly moisture, depending on the content, and that reduces a lot. In aerobic composting, you lose through emissions like water vapor and CO2. That's the steam and the heat coming off. I don't think I could give you a figure for how much organic material to make a 70 bag of compost. 70 kilo bag, did you say?
70 litre.
70 litre bag, sorry. I'm not a great mathematician. I can't give you a figure.
Would you say a normal compost heap reduces by 2/3 over the course of it sort of processing?
I'd say that's about fair to say, a maximum of. It's about that figure, between a half and 2/3. Yeah.
So yeah, so if Anne, you're suggesting 3 times the end product, that kind of makes sense. That you get a
Sounds
third
reasonable.
back basically of what of the material that you put in. Okay, thank you. Lynn is asking, we collect free compost from the local council's green waste site. Would you say this is a good move or not? It's free, but does it represent biosecurity risks and perhaps not the best balance of compost for trees?
I would say it's free, which is a good thing. It's making use of a resource. It's from the civic community sites, recycling centres, I figure.
Yeah.
That will be like what's called PAS 100 certified compost. So biosecurity is really a big deal with council compost. So it would have been heated under high heat and pressure, and I don't think there's a biosecurity risk. The downside of those council composts is you get plastic in them, because it's hard to sort of sieve out all the contaminants, but there'll be some nutrient value. So I think it's good to mix with other composts, not, you know, and boost with organic, because it's not much life in there. That's the thing. It kind of, when I tend to think it's kind of like, it's not living soil. We're trying to get through community composting, growing the, you know, making compost yourself, but it has a part to play, and it's sterile.
Yeah,
and I guess
it's gone through.
sorry, go on, Jake. Go. Yeah, apologies.
Yeah, I was going to say, like Ben said, it's gone through that like sterilization or pasteurization process, so it gets rid of all the diseases, which is really good, or pathogenics. But then you do lose a bit of the quality of life for it. So it can be good to find ways to get that back into it. And worms are great for that. Biochar, even if you've got like a mother compost or something like that, just try and add some of that in, because there's good organic matter and qualities in that, and it's much more easily scalable. But it's nice to get some of that life back in there as well.
So are we talking about the sort of maturation stage there of they could collect that compost, but then maybe keep it on site in a maturation bin for a bit longer with perhaps some mother compost, mix some biochar and add some more worms in, and just let it develop a bit more before it's used, so that there's more life in the soil?
Yeah, because I was just thinking of like some of the say like in Cornwall, I've seen some composting green waste sites where the piles are so big that they end up crushing the life. Plus, they go through that pasteurization, so they're actually mainly just bacteria, because it's too heavy. When it's like as tall as like a house compost, it's crushing a lot of the life in there, because they're so sensitive, these microbes. And ideally having it no more than 1.5 meters really has a good effect to keep those oxygen levels that Ben was saying about. Is a really good thing.
Okay, great, thank you. And then Rob has messaged to say, thank you, Jake and Ben, very interesting and inspiring and so useful. And his question, he lives in Cornwall and would like to join a good comprehensive composting course, could travel to South Hams. How is it best to find that course?
I was going to say, I'm doing one in St Ives.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm doing one in St Ives and one in Totnes, but I can put a link in it quickly.
That's great.
And yeah, if yeah, you can book on Eventbrite, and feel free to message me any questions about it. Shall I put a link or something? Hold on.
Could I say something?
Of course, Rob. Yes, please do.
Is that okay?
Yeah, of course.
I'm a bit nervous because I bow down to your great expertise, gentlemen. Are these links going to stay on here only for the duration of the webinar?
We will distribute everything by email afterwards as well for everyone.
Okay. Including the links?
Yes. Yeah,
oh,
we
that's
can do
lovely.
that. Yeah.
Thanks, Hayley.
No problem. Yeah.
I've provided a page of links relevant to community composting. I mean, it's just one side. I could go on and on, but it's a beginning. But I'd like to urge you to look at the Devon Community Composting Network, because we've got loads of resources on there that are applicable to this, how to set projects up, and all aspects from schools composting to community stuff to there's loads of stuff on there. There's training documents as well. So we recently did a training course which was part of this project that was really useful. It's such a big topic, but we're sharing and outsourcing all we've got as far as information. So if you wanted to email me, I could provide you some more resource further to what's on that links page that I've put together.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. Yeah, I might email you for the information. Thank you.
Okay, pleasure. Please do.
Thank you. And then, so there's a final question from, I think it's the final question. Yeah, from Stephen. All really good advice on general composting, touched on the importance of fungal compost for young trees. can we go over the specific advice for creating compost for trees? So can we just do sort of a summary of what do we really need to be thinking about for tree health and resilience when it comes to composting? Is there certain ingredients into the compost that we can be using, and thinking about the soil biome as well, and the mycology, I guess, linking that to tree health.
Can I pass that
Jake?
to
I
you,
can just
Jake?
say-
Can I let you answer that? I just want to think rammy or wood chip as well might be something to mention.
Yeah, I was going to say, with trees, you want to get that fungal relationship, and you want to have as much fungal species in there that will get the more complex foods that support a tree. And so doing a more fungal dominated compost, and especially with wood chips, giving it that time for them to decompose, to release some of that nutrition and build up fungal populations, is really, really useful. And then if you can integrate 10% biochar into that, just to say, like, what I would say is that use at least 50% wood chips, even, slightly decomposed wood chips, as Ben was saying. And if you can get 10% biochar in there as well, that can then boost those populations and multiply them a bit more. But just remember, like, if you're doing a compost for a plant that grows slowly, you need to be patient with the compost and give it time to release that nutrition. Say, like, we can do fast compost for the bacteria, for the more annual fast growing plants, but for the plants that are more perennial and take the time, like trees, just giving it that time, and you need to be at least waiting a year for that compost to be ready. And that's why it's okay to use higher percentages of the wood chips, and just being conscious of making sure you can get enough oxygen in there, and whether you use turning or tubes to try and get the air in there, or using worms to just make many channels to aerate that over time. But yeah, if you don't want to manage it so much, just get the worms to do the work for you, but just be patient with them. But they do very well. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Jake. So just conscious of time, we've got 4 minutes left. I just wanted to highlight, I think, we can never cover all of the detail in an hour and a half. It's just such a massive topic, and it's two topics as well. It's, you know, soil biome in general, and then composting techniques as well. But we will pass over all the information via email, so have a look for that, probably coming out tomorrow, with lots of links and bedtime reading. But what I would say is the option of stacking on a site. So if you already have the site, or you're thinking of progressing to a bigger site, there's real potential to have your community tree nursery, and then also a community composting. It could also be a community composting site. So it does require a bit more space, so it depends on where you're sited at the moment. And you could also be creating your own biochar as well. Like, all of these things work in sync together, and they're all things that could be done on one site. And if you're still in the stage of looking for a site, there's some really good evidence, and, you know, Ben has really experienced that in Devon, of getting great support from the local council. And they can often provide a site. And if you have different, you could call them enterprises, like you could be selling the compost, which subsidizes the tree nursery. It could be an income, or you could be using that compost for the tree nursery. You could be selling the biochar as well, or using it as part of the tree nursery. It engages more of the community that might be interested in one element or another. It creates resilience on that site of different activities and potential income streams. It also creates resilience in terms of more people being involved, and more of a benefit and activity on one site, which means you can then talk to funders. You know, there might be funding that you can get for community composting that wouldn't have been available to use a community tree nursery. But if you're doing multiple things on site, it gives you a broader range of funding to go for as well. And within sort of permaculture principles, that's called stacking. That's having as many functions on one site as possible. It creates a much better resilience as an organization, and just gives, yeah, a much more diversity for people to be getting involved in as well. The other thing I would say is look at the networks that Ben has shared as well. It might be that actually you can just support a community tree nursery near you and get some more of the compost from them, probably at a much cheaper rate than what you're buying. It will be peat free. And even if you can't get all of it from them, as we were saying, you can mix it together with the stuff that you're buying, just to make sure that when you use it, it's not such a it's more of a living soil. It's got all of the right ingredients in there to really create tree resilience and health. And I'm searching my notes for the term that you used, Jake. I can't find it. Oh, what was it? No, I've lost it. And I need more swatting up required on me on the soil biome. But basically, the more life is in the soil, the healthier the plants. You can rewatch the webinar and and learn.
Trophobiosis.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, Jake.
Yeah,
Thanks for saving
okay.
me. So yeah, thank you very much all for coming. I hope it was enjoyable and helpful to you. I'm sure it was. I found it very enjoyable and helpful. Yeah, we'll send out all of the links and all of the information. If you have any follow-up questions, let us know. Do register for the CTNC network if you've enjoyed this webinar and you would find it helpful to network with more CTNs in the future. You can register via the link on our website, and follow us on YouTube and Eventbrite for more webinars coming soon. But I will leave you to your evenings now and your precious time. Thank you very much for joining us, and yeah, I hope to see you again on webinars in the future. Thank you very much. And thank you to our speakers. Thanks, Ben and Jake.
Thanks
you all.
everyone.
Absolutely incredible.
I hope we get to carry on the conversation. Yeah.